Welcome back to Buddhism Demystified. Today, on this deep dive, we're tackling the flame extinguished. It's about nirvana. And we're going to explore, what it really means to kind of like extinguish suffering and reach true freedom. Have you ever felt like you're just juggling way too many things? I know I have. Just last week, actually, I was feeling super overwhelmed, with work and life and just everything. And I just thought to myself, wouldn't it be amazing to just let it all go? And, that yearning for peace, for just a little sense of calm in the middle of all the chaos. That's kind of what we're going to explore today. And hey, if you're liking these deep dives, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review. It really helps us out. Now let's get into it. So what exactly is this nirvana we're talking about?
It's a fascinating question, and it's often misunderstood. Nirvana or nibbana in Pali, it isn't about going to like a heavenly place or something after you die. It's about reaching a specific state of being. Think of it like a candle flame.
Okay, I'm with you. How does a flame help us understand nirvana?
Well, a flame needs fuel to keep burning right. And in Buddhism, the fuel for suffering is all of our own greed, hatred, and delusion. Like all those negative forces inside of us. So nirvana is the extinguishing of that flame, like the complete stopping of those fuels. Imagine a still, calm lake, perfectly reflecting the moon. That tranquil image can kind of help us get a visual for the peace of nirvana.
So it's not about physically going somewhere. It's more about transforming our inner state.
Exactly. The word nirvana actually literally means to extinguish or to blow out. And when those inner fires are extinguished, we reach true liberation and peace. It's all about letting go of the negativity that keeps us trapped in this cycle of suffering.
That does sound incredibly liberating. But it also sounds really difficult. Can you maybe break down what this state of nirvana actually feels like, or what it means to be in that state?
Well, it is difficult to describe, mostly because it's said to be beyond our normal human experience. But we can get a sense of it by understanding its key characteristics. First and foremost, nirvana is characterized by the complete cessation of suffering, both physical and mental. It also marks the end of rebirth. Breaking free from that cycle of birth, death, and rebirth that Buddhists call samsara, and with that liberation comes ultimate peace and supreme wisdom.
Supreme wisdom, does that mean like becoming all-knowing?
Not quite all-knowing. It's more about experiencing the world without the distortions of your own desires and fears. Imagine seeing reality as it truly is, not clouded by your own baggage and stuff. That's the kind of profound understanding that comes with nirvana.
Wow, I can definitely see why the idea of nirvana is so compelling. But let's be practical for just a minute. Why should, the average person juggling their everyday stresses actually care about nirvana?
Because it offers a path to the freedom you were talking about earlier. Freedom from the constraints of our everyday existence and from the things that cause us stress and anxiety and just plain dissatisfaction.
Okay, I get that. But it still feels a bit abstract and far off. How does this ancient concept apply to, my life right now?
Well, there's this story in the Pali Canon, the earliest collection of Buddhist scriptures, about a guy who got shot with a poisoned arrow. But instead of letting the doctor treat him, he just kept getting hung up on irrelevant questions like, what kind of arrow is it and who shot it? The Buddha used this story to show how we often get caught up in intellectual debates and questions, instead of focusing on what really matters, which is seeking liberation from suffering.
So it's about taking action instead of getting lost in concepts.
Exactly. Nirvana is a practical goal with real-world benefits. And to achieve it, we need to focus on the path that leads to it. And that path begins with understanding the Four Noble Truths. They're the foundation of Buddhism, like a framework for understanding suffering and how to overcome it. The Four Noble Truths are really about facing reality head-on. The first truth, the truth of suffering, it just acknowledges that suffering is a part of life, We experience it in lots of different forms. Physical pain, emotional distress, loss, disappointment. It's just something we all go through.
Yeah, no argument there. Life can be tough.
Yeah.
But how does just acknowledging suffering actually help?
Well, it's about seeing things as they are, without pretending suffering doesn't exist, right? The second truth, the truth of the origin of suffering, it kind of goes deeper. It pinpoints the root cause of our suffering. It's not like the stuff that happens to us. It's our own clinging to desires.
Yeah.
And our ignorance of reality's true nature.
So basically we're creating our own suffering. That's a hard pill to swallow.
It might seem that way at first, but it's actually really empowering, because once you understand that suffering starts within, you realize you also have the power to overcome it. And that brings us to the third truth, the truth of the cessation of suffering. This truth says that by letting go of those desires and overcoming ignorance, we can actually achieve the end of suffering, which is nirvana.
Ah, so it all comes back to nirvana. So I'm guessing the fourth truth is about how to actually achieve that cessation of suffering.
You got it. The fourth truth is the truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering. And that path is the Noble Eightfold Path. It's not about following like a bunch of strict rules. It's more about cultivating a way of life that leads to more peace and fulfillment.
The Noble Eightfold Path. You mentioned that earlier. To be honest, it sounds a little bit daunting. Is it all about like intense meditation and giving up everything you own?
Not at all. It's not about becoming a monk or isolating yourself. It's actually super practical. It's a very holistic approach to life. Think of it as 8 guidelines. They touch upon every aspect of who we are, from what we think and say to our actions, and even what we do for a living.
Okay, so tell me more about these guidelines. What are the 8 aspects of the Eightfold Path?
Think of it as a path to cultivate wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline. So the first aspect is right understanding, which we already talked about. It's about understanding those 4 noble truths and seeing the world as it truly is without delusion.
So it's about laying a foundation based on truth.
Exactly. Then we have right intention, which is all about cultivating positive intentions in all your thoughts and actions. Think kindness, compassion, a genuine desire to help others.
Sounds like being a good person.
Pretty much. Then there's right speech, which is about being mindful of how powerful your words are. It's about speaking truthfully and kindly, and avoiding harmful speech like gossip or putting people down.
So choosing your words carefully and being mindful of how they impact others.
Exactly. Then we have right action, which kind of goes along with right speech and right intention. It's about acting in ways that are ethical and skillful and beneficial to yourself and others.
So this is like a blueprint for living a more mindful and ethical life.
You could say that. And it even applies to our work. Right livelihood is the 5th aspect. It's about choosing a profession that doesn't harm others and aligns with your values. You know, in today's world, that can mean really examining if your work contributes to problems like environmental damage or social injustice.
It's interesting to think about right livelihood like that. Like, what if I work for a company with not so great environmental practices? It really makes us think about our choices.
It really does. The Eightfold Path encourages us to be really mindful and responsible in everything we do. Next is right effort, which is about cultivating positive qualities and getting rid of the negative ones. It's about putting in the work consistently, both when you're meditating and just in everyday life.
So reaching nirvana takes continuous effort.
It does. But the rewards are incredible. Then we come to the 7th aspect, right, mindfulness. This one is about being present in each moment, paying attention to your thoughts, feelings, and what you're sensing, without judgment. It's about growing a deeper awareness of your inner and outer world.
Mindfulness is so popular these days, but it's more than just a buzzword, right?
Oh, definitely. It's a really powerful practice that can transform how you relate to yourself and the world. And finally, there's right concentration, which is about developing really focused attention and mental discipline. People usually cultivate this through meditation, but you can also practice it in other things that require focus, like playing music or working on a really challenging task.
So the Eightfold Path includes all sorts of things.
From cultivating ethical conduct to developing mental focus.
It's a really complete guide for personal transformation, but it's also kind of a lot to absorb. Do you have any advice for someone who wants to incorporate even small aspects of this path into their busy life?
Absolutely. You don't have to change everything about your life all at once. Remember those small acts of kindness we talked about? Like holding the door for someone, or giving a genuine compliment, or even just listening to someone when they're talking. These are all ways of practicing right action and right speech. They may seem insignificant, but they can actually have a ripple effect and make the world a more positive place.
I like that. It's about finding those little opportunities to practice the Eightfold Path.
Exactly. What about right mindfulness? Any tips on how to work on that?
Yeah, I can use some tips.
Well, we were talking about mindful eating earlier. Instead of just scarfing down your meals, try slowing down. Savor each bite. Pay attention to the tastes, textures, and even smells. It's a small change, but it's a powerful way to be more aware.
You know, I do tend to scroll through my phone while I eat lunch.
It happens.
Maybe I'll try putting my phone away and actually paying attention to my food.
It's a small shift, but it can make a big difference. You can also practice mindfulness when you're walking. Instead of rushing around, pay attention to how your feet feel on the ground and the movement of your body and what you see and hear. It's about turning something ordinary into a chance to be present.
I like those examples.
Yeah.
We can be mindful without totally changing our routines.
Okay.
But let's talk about nirvana for a minute.
Right.
We've talked about what it is and how to reach it. But I have to ask, how can we really understand something that's supposed to be beyond words and concepts? It just seems so intangible.
I get it. It's natural to feel that way. Sometimes words just aren't enough. Imagine trying to explain what honey tastes like to someone who's never tried it. They won't really get it until they experience it for themselves.
That's true.
And that's why the Buddha didn't always answer when people asked him to describe nirvana. Words can kind of point us in the right direction, but they can't capture the whole thing. We have to experience it ourselves to truly understand.
Like those Zen koans.
Exactly.
Those riddles that are designed to get us thinking differently.
There are so many paradoxical descriptions of nirvana in Buddhist texts. It's described as neither existence nor non-existence, the unconditioned, the deathless. These descriptions aren't meant to be logical. They're meant to challenge us and open us to the possibility of something beyond our usual understanding.
So it's about letting go of our need to label everything.
That's a big part of it.
And just experiencing it directly.
Yes. And that's where meditation and the other practices of the Eightfold Path come in. They help us quiet our minds, become more aware, and open ourselves up to that which is beyond words.
So fascinating. But let's get back to reality for a second. How is this idea of nirvana relevant to us in today's world? How do we find peace and liberation when life is so chaotic?
That's a question a lot of people have. But the great thing about Buddhism is that you don't have to wait until you're fully enlightened to see the benefits. Every step you take towards nirvana brings you closer to peace, reduces your suffering, and helps you feel more joy and compassion.
So it's not all or nothing.
No.
It's about progress, no matter how small.
Exactly. Remember those examples of mindful eating, mindful walking, acts of kindness?
Yes.
Those are all small ways to add the principles of the Eightfold Path into your daily life. And as you practice these things, you'll start to notice a change in your experience. You'll become more present, more aware, more compassionate, and more peaceful.
I see. So by integrating these practices into our lives, nirvana becomes more of a lived experience.
That's the idea. It's about making nirvana a part of your daily life, not just a far-off goal.
I like that.
It makes it feel much more attainable.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly what the Buddha wanted. He taught that the path to enlightenment is open to all of us. It's a journey that can benefit you every step of the way.
Wow, this has been an incredible deep dive. We've only scratched the surface. But I feel like I already understand so much more about nirvana and the Eightfold Path. You said earlier that the Buddha described nirvana as the highest happiness. Can you talk more about that? What does happiness mean in the context of nirvana?
That's a great question. The happiness of nirvana isn't like the happiness we usually feel. It's not based on getting what we want or having our desires fulfilled. It comes from being completely free from suffering. It's a much deeper happiness. It comes from truly understanding reality and having boundless compassion for all beings.
Sounds like pure bliss.
In a way, it is. It's often described as profound peace and joy. But this bliss isn't passive. It's an active state of being aware, wise, and compassionate. Imagine being totally present and engaged with the world, but without all the suffering that comes from getting attached to things or pushing them away.
That's a beautiful way to put it, to see the world as it is without all the emotional ups and downs.
Exactly. That's what makes seeking nirvana so worthwhile. It's not just about escaping suffering. It's about discovering a much deeper and more fulfilling way to live.
I've learned so much today. We've covered so much ground. And I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We've talked about nirvana as putting out the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. So my question to you is this. What would your life be like if those fires were extinguished? What kind of freedom and peace would you experience?
That's a really powerful question. It invites us all to imagine a life filled with peace, compassion, and wisdom.
And with that, I want to thank you for being here today. It's been an honor to learn from you.
It was my pleasure.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Buddhism. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, keep seeking, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.